Hello, everybody, and welcome back after a long, far too long absence to Suikoden 3. Wow, so there was a bit of a gap there, like a couple months, and I'm super sorry. And so it's because a lot of things happened. So I got a day job, like one that requires a lot of hours put in. I negotiated a contract with a website to do some writing for them. I had some severe equipment failures, which were absolutely frustrating and are still not entirely resolved. And I am injured right now. I have a back injury for which I am taking copious amounts of medication, which will mean that I will talk really fast during this segment, and hopefully I won't be too incoherent. Anyway, we are jumping back into Geddoe's story. I will be honest with you. I've tried to record this about 4 times now. There are multiple reasons why that had not worked, and now hopefully this will be the charm. So we are back in Caleria, where Geddoe, captain of one of the Harmonian Southern Defense Force units, is sort of met up with his troops. They've recovered after an attack on the Karia village in the grasslands, which has kicked off a war between the Grasslanders and the Confederacy of Zexin. Also, this is not the person I want to talk about, but hey, now it's good for us to know. We get imported goods here in Caleria. Isn't that fascinating? Whatever. I need to pick up Ace, and I need to pick up Isla. The super quick version of everything that's gone on, for those of you who don't remember and you're watching for whatever reason. So, Geddoe was around in the Lizard Clan Hollow when their chief was assassinated, which led the Lizard Clan to attack the Zexin during a peace conference between them and the Grasslanders. Something wrong is going on. There seems to be some magic at play. But as a result of that attack, the Knights of Zexin, led by Chris, another protagonist, went and burnt down the Karia village, which has led to pretty much full-on war. So, Geddoe's... I want to find the right way to talk about Geddoe, because I want to stress 2 things. One of which is going to sound like a negative, but then it's hopefully going to build into the second thing, which is positive. And I think the point I want to make is this. It was perhaps wrong of me to have this playthrough start with Geddoe's chapter, his chapter 1. And that's only because Geddoe himself is not a highly charismatic character. He's able to walk into many locations. He seems to garner a lot of respect from people. He seems to be well informed. Here he's talking to a detective disguised as a fruit merchant. Before he was able to walk into the Lizard Clan fine, he knew Lucia, the clan chief of the Karia. He also knew Jimba. He's somebody with a lot of connections, but not really with a lot of personality, which might mean that he's sort of hard as a character, a viewpoint character at least, to get into, to sort of thrust you into the story, right? Because he's so detached, whereas like Hugo or Chris, they tend to focus on the highly emotional things. So one of the downsides of Geddoe is that he's very very morose, right? He's just very sort of staid and taciturn, and that doesn't really translate to a strong protagonist. Geddoe, even though he is one of the 3 viewpoint characters, tends to be largely a supporting character in a lot of ways until we understand what his past is. Until then, he tends to be maybe not as enthralling as Chris, who has a lot of burdens to bear, or Hugo, who has a lot of emotion that he wears on his sleeve. What Geddoe does give us is the benefit of an impartial viewpoint on almost everything that is occurring in the game space. And that's important because Suikoden is not a game series that concerns itself with its game space by crafting a solid game space, like a solid 3D space, and then encouraging exploration in it. It's not like Skies of Arcadia, where the idea of exploration is sort of baked into the environments, and then that means, you should walk around and take in the culture of each place. That doesn't really happen so much here, even though this is a game full of nations and politics and all sorts of things. What Geddoe does is, because he's able to enter areas sort of unimpeded and then sort of observe them with his, I guess it's his strongest characteristic, which is sort of his somber nature, right? He's a very no nonsense, very very simple person. It feels like, anyway, even though hiding he's hiding a past that we will only just get to learn of in this chapter. The game sort of sacrifices his charisma in order to allow him to be sort of a cipher that moves from location to location, and he doesn't really have to put up with a lot of bullshit. He's able to observe the grasslanders for good and for ill. He's able to walk into areas like this is a border town on the border with Harmonia, but also he's going to observe Harmonian troops here in a moment, and he's not like a captain of the Harmonia Guard or something, like the Royal Guard or like some formalized military thing. He's part of a mercenary detachment that is basically contracted out to Harmonia. So even when it comes to observing Harmonia, the nation he ostensibly represents in the trinity of Zexin, Harmonia, Grasslands that happens between Hugo, himself, and Chris, he has also the right amount of detachment to observe Harmonia in a way that can be critical of Harmonia, in ways that Chris's closeness to Zexin or Hugo's relationship with the Grasslands doesn't allow them to. Geddoe is able to sort of pull back from the micro of things, where this game is very concerned with the relationships between people, which is where Hugo and Chris's chapters really lie, where a lot of the strengths of them are. It's a lot of micro interactions between people that inform and color the game world. Geddoe allows us a larger sort of macro image of things, where we're able to see what's going on. And that's again because Suikoden doesn't consider it too important to make the physical space itself sort of a character unto itself. Instead, what it does is something like this, where it keeps a sense of continuity and canon and lore even by having repeated formal elements that show up or characters that show up. So Albert here, for instance, is a tactician, a strategist for Harmonia, but he is also from the Silverberg family. And to pretty much everybody who might be listening to this, all 10 of you, that means nothing, right? But if you played previous Suikoden games, you know that the Silverbergs are well known for being a family that raises some of the finest military minds in the entire world. And so his presence reminds us of a sort of repeating formal element in the games, which is the presence of a strategist, whether in your army or the enemy's army. And then here we have Bishop Sasarai. We'll ignore all the implications of Harmonia's theocracy for a moment and really focus on the fact that Sasarai is a character that showed up in Suikoden 2 when Harmonia allied with your enemies, and you actually had to fight against Sasarai on the battlefield. And so, where Suikoden doesn't concern itself with its space by having sort of an emphasis on moving about the space or observing what is within the space, what it does do is that it stresses its game world by having traceable character histories and things like that. I could trace Albert's bloodline if I wanted to. Joker, I think we talked about it before. Joker shows up in Genso Suikoden, I think Volume 2, where he interacts with the main character of that game. And that main character shows up in Chris's Chapter 2, which we will observe later on. So Suikoden's idea of crafting a a continuous game space, sort of one that has a lot of solidity, is one where there's a sense of history from game to game and even console to console. It's not really concerned with crafting spaces, whereas it's concerned with sort of crafting lineages and sort of having these elements. And I said contingent or like contiguous. I don't even know what I said like 2 sentences ago because, hey, I'm taking medicine for my injury. But the idea that sort of Suikoden exists and persists even without us observing it as players, right? So I played Suikoden 1, but I missed Suikoden 2, but for whatever reason I mention, or I look at another title and I see like a character. So like, here's one good example of that. I play Suikoden 1, there's a character named Ted. He dies in it. And you inherit his rune. He's your friend, and things happen, blah, blah, blah. Not a spoiler at all. It happens within, like, the first hour of the game. In Suikoden 4, you see Ted again, because Suikoden 4 is set in the past. Now, it doesn't mean much. Like, you don't need to know who Ted is. But if you do know who Ted is, you get the sense that they're, like, these game worlds are, sort of persistent, right? The only thing I want to note here is that Isla had to stay behind during a lot of that observation period when they were looking at the bishop, because she looks like she's from the grasslands. She looks like a Karia girl, so she had to stay behind, which is sort of an expression of some of the anxieties of what's going on in like this game space. Like, and that's sort of not a full-on racial thing, but it is definitely an ethnic thing of like, oh, we couldn't have you with you because you look too Karian, and that would cause us trouble. And even having small mentions of that in the game is important. It implies a lot about the political structures, which is sort of what Geddoe's chapters are about, which is why it's kind of important that Geddoe's group be as diverse as it is, in terms of gender, in terms of ethnicity, in terms of all those things. What do we need to know from what we observed? There was a war between the Grasslands and Harmonia, and that happened 50 years ago, and there was a ceasefire. A 50-year ceasefire that was called. And that ceasefire is about to end, which is why Harmonia is in the area. And Geddoe, in his wisdom, says that this could turn into a fire like no one's seen since the City Alliance Wars 15 years ago. He's referring to Suikoden 2, which is a nice little Easter egg type thing for people who've played those games. Again, keeping the world sort of within a realm of a strong continuity. But the more important thing is that Geddoe, like, Harmonia foots his bill as a mercenary, but he's not like a lapdog for them. And so Geddoe's chapters are largely about untangling the sort of web of conspiracy behind what is furthering the conflict between the Zexen and the Grasslanders and sort of the larger political things that are at stake. A war between the Grasslands and Zexen can be bad enough, but then if Harmonia stomps in with all of their booted thugs and they try to annex both countries, or the Grasslands, which is sort of this collective nation space, and then Zexen, like, that could be a problem. And the game, again, is concerned far more with its politics and its people than it ever is with, like, its physical spaces or boundaries. And Geddoe's chapter does a good job of sort of exploring and expressing that. I am going to try and buy some folks some items. I don't know, like I said, I'm going to be talking fast, and sometimes I have too many thoughts in my head compared to muscles that I can flex in my mouth to say the words fast enough. My mouth lags behind my brain constantly. The basic point being this. Suikoden is a game that is intimately concerned with systems and how characters interact with those systems, with institutions. And it expresses that through the character interactions. It doesn't express that through the spaces themselves, the same way that other JRPGs might do. Instead, it concerns themselves, or rather, it concerns itself with the people who occupy the space and sort of says, well, observe all these things and sort of take them all in and take them in through multiple lenses, particularly in this game where that's the central conceit. And you'll sort of get the chance to get a stronger grasp on what is going on. I am going to buy 2 wind runes. I did not mean to back out completely, but I want to fix these runes. So one is going to go to Queen, and for now, oh no, I can't get rid of, oh that's right, so he has to keep his lightning rune. A fix. I want him to keep his fire rune. I want a water rune, but I don't have one right now. So I'll just keep this extra rune. I will be recruiting plenty of characters. There's 108 of them. Not all of them you use in combat, but enough of them you do so that I might actually consider having them, like an extra rune just around for it. I need to get as much defense on these characters as possible. I can sell his old one. Jacques and Isla, Queen. But I'm burning through money that way, which is not enjoyable. And can I go through this door by any chance? No. My problem with Caleria is that I don't know where skill trainers are. So I'm going to run into the inn just for a moment on the assumption that skill trainers are in there, and if they are not, we will head out and we will travel, which will give me a chance to talk about combat in this game. At a bare minimum, I want to find a save point. I really do, and I don't know where a save point could be. Let's move about. None of this looks like anything useful. There's a lady with a cat. Doesn't really help me. There are cats everywhere. Oh my gosh. I should be more excited about that, but the lack of a save point is a problem. Because if I die during any of the fights coming up on my way to Lebuc, which is the village we're going to, it sends me back to the beginning of the chapter. Because the save system in this game is fucking absurd and shouldn't be the way it is. Yeah, I don't got time to hunt around for things. I don't want to waste your time with a lot of busyness, which is also why there's like 2 optional bosses to fight in this segment. I'm not going to do them, which also means that Geddoe and his team are probably dangerously underleveled for everything that's going on. Because I think the game presumes that you're going to be far more interested in moving about these maps than you are, even though really, I just need to go here. Like, I just have to go through the mountain path a little bit again, and then go to Lebuc. It's a quick path. And then I do a little bit of snooping around in Lebuc, and then I lead up to a boss fight at the end of the chapter, and la-di-da, all sorts of interesting stuff. But I think the game wants to encourage exploration, but does nothing to really do so. It just sort of gives you all these points on the map, and like you're like, oh, I wonder what could happen if I go there, but there's no real incentive to go there. And not necessarily even in the sense of like, well, I need the game to incentivize all my actions by giving me a reward or something like that. I mean more along the lines of, does it make sense for my characters to run off and go do this? Does it make sense for me to not go straight to Lebuc? Like, why would I go around, other than the fact that I'm a player playing an RPG? Like, there's no reason for me to just, like, piss about and twiddle my thumbs. It makes more sense for me to go directly to where my objective is, because even though Geddoe's unit is sort of laid back. There's nothing about the narrative right now that says, yeah, take your time. The stakes of everything that's happened in these games have consistently been something along the lines of like, well, let's take care of all of this because war is happening and lives are at stake and all sorts of stuff. Nice big fire attack there, getting some frame rate slowdown. But honestly, like, it's another manifestation of how much the game doesn't particularly seem interested in sending you around the game space. Like, it has this space, but do we really concern ourselves with that space? I don't know. Maybe it wants to pretend that we are concerned with it, but I don't think as players we ever actually are. I don't want to use mega medicine, I just want to use regular medicine. Get people up to a general bit of health parity, because once I enter Lebuke, there's a fight, and they can hit really hard, and I know that because out of the many different ways in which I have failed to record this segment of the game thus far, the biggest has been, oh hey, let us play through this chapter, I will be fine. Geddoe's chapters are hard, but they're not that hard. Oh, I got to Lebuke and died, and now I have to redo it again. I could do some sagacious or judicious editing and say like, okay, see you all in 2 seconds, and do like a wipe, like, but I'm not going to do that because I sort of want this to be a continuous experience for once. I don't want it to be broken up. I want sort of the experience of just playing the game. I was so scared that I had accidentally run into the aggro range of the monster that is at the top of the path. There's a giant stone golem that is guarding a treasure chest, and I'm terrified of it. It is hard to damage. I don't know what to do with it. It's just like, no way. I want no part of it. You can see me run a little bit past it, maybe. Even then, like, if it's out of frame, it's not going to hurt me. I keep on telling myself, it's out of frame, it's not going to hurt me. Runes. I just want to make sure that Queen has her wind rune. Good. Because that will be important for the battle entering Lebuke, because there's multiple enemies in that fight, like a big party of them. So as we make our way up this mountaintop, let's talk about the combat in Suikoden 3 for a minute. It's shit. That's the really undiplomatic way to put it. I don't like the combat in these games, necessarily. I was disappointed, as I sort of expressed in a previous segment, with how this game handles its strategy segments compared to other entries in the series. And then a big problem with combat in this game is that it gives you I'm basically controlling 3 entities, but I'm controlling 3 units of 2 characters, but when I choose attack, I'm choosing attack for both of them, which is very strange. And then also, a big downside is that the characters sort of move around the space to get into position to attack, and they do so of their own accord, and they go like willy-nilly wherever the fuck they want to go. And there are certain magics that I have and other things that rely heavily on positioning, right? So let's say that I know an enemy has a lot of fire magic. Well, one of the things I would like to do maybe to combat that and counter it would be like, well, I don't want my characters to stand so close to each other. But I have no control over that. The characters go where they want to go. And whereas that happened in Skies of Arcadia, and it actually gave the battles sort of a feeling of activity, and it never felt unfair because there never were really any specific area of effect spells that were like, oh, they only affect this single area. And here that happens, and because of that, it makes it really crappy that you don't have as much direct control over your actors. In fact, I never feel like I have control over an actual actor, except perhaps Geddoe. Instead, I sort of have control over these amalgamated abstractions of, like, it's so weird. Like, all combat in RPGs are abstractions by virtue of the fact that they use math to represent certain things like damage or poison or defense or anything like that. But here, everything feels far more distant and abstracted than even games that are highly stylized, if only because I don't have a real sense of control over the actors. I never feel like I'm commanding Geddoe or commanding Ace or commanding Queen. I get the sense that I'm commanding a unit that contains these characters, which is very much unenjoyable. It's not good the way that feels. Now, other titles don't mess it up as much. Suikoden 2 is very good about this. Other titles get it worse, even. Suikoden 4 cuts down the amount of available characters that you play as down to 4, and that makes it a little bit more manageable, but you lose a lot of the cool dynamic attacks and things from other games. Instead, this sort of, like, from a combat standpoint, sort of middles about and doesn't exactly know what it wants to do. Whereas, from a narrative standpoint, this game is incredibly competent and confident. But from sort of a mechanical standpoint, this game doesn't really know what it wants. At least when it comes to its combat systems. It sort of offers just like this very bare bones RPG combat that doesn't have a lot happening, which is such a bummer because Suikoden 2 is an amazing game. This is a pretty good game, but Suikoden 2 is an amazing game. And this is just sort of one of those weird examples of a game that didn't translate going from the PlayStation 2 to the PlayStation 3 as easily as you would have liked. I'm using all my powerful magic right now because these people are total dickweeds. So just a ton of magic. But see, look how hard they hit. Jacques is going to get knocked down, and that just stopped Geddoe's chanting. Like, these enemies hit really hard, and I am afraid that I'm just at a brick wall point right now, almost. Because you would think, okay, yeah, maybe I want to explore and level up, but the game doesn't really, like I sort of said before, there's nothing in the game that says, like, oh, you should totally try doing this, this, and this. The game's not interested in that. Which is kind of, and by kind of I mean absolutely 100% shitty. We need Geddoe to start chanting. We need to use Soaring Bolt because there's just too many enemies. And to save ourselves here, we want to use Great Blessing. This is just a good example of, like, how fucking useful magic is in this game. That's gonna potentially stop Isla's chanting. But yeah, if they gang up on one of your teammates, like, you get wrecked. Geddoe's chapters are hard, but there's something about the way the combat system handles things that can also make things feel sort of inherently unfair at times. But if we get to this second round with Geddoe and he casts, we are absolutely going to destroy because our magic went off. But it feels very dependent on the random number generator of, like, oh, which character will attack what. I don't feel like I have a lot of control in combat, whether that's over individual entities or in sort of the course of actions in the battlefield itself. Like, I never feel like I have a lot of ways of affecting what's going on around me, which is an absolute mistake in a game like this. Alright, so all we have left is this one Mantor. Hey, we did it. Alright, that's pretty good. So we will see what's going on here and then make our way into the village of Lebuc. And then in the next segment, we will explore. But let's see what's going on here. What's happening? Why'd they attack us? Not to let any unidentified people in. Ordered by the regular army of Harmonia. By the bishop. The masked bishop. Who we will talk about in earnest later on. I think the Masked Bishop is a very good antagonist for a game. Understandable motives, mysterious presence, interesting relationships to other characters. There's a reason he's behind that mask. All sorts of cool stuff going on. I absolutely like what they did with this. Not even absolutely like, I love what they did with this. I think it's very, very smart. So Geddoe's job is to search for the true rune, which probably presumably means the true fire rune that the Firebringer had. But I think it's just something that's meant to be like, he's looking for any true runes because Harmonia just wants any of them. It's sort of ambiguous. But it's also interesting how that affects Geddoe later on. Let's see, will you tell me your name? What's in a name? There are things that are better kept a secret with this type of mission. Ah. And Geddoe's just like, if you say so, I don't... whatever. I do like the costume design in this game quite a bit. It really finds this nice, comfortable edge between fantasy and sort of this affectated, not even quite feature thing, but like, Ace is wearing what feels like a normal army jacket almost, with a couple extra accoutrements, right? It's not this sort of highly medieval thing or anything like that. But now we see that there are two bishops around. They're Sasarai and the Masked Bishop. And we'll see what's going on. And so now everyone's curiosity is piqued more than anything else. And here we actually the game just sort of tells us explicitly about the organization of the Harmonian army. There's the actual army, then the regional army, and then the defense units, which are the mercenaries. And then there are third-class citizen units, which are... that's a hell of a term. Third-class citizen. Just like the people who are riding the Mantors. And Isla sort of contrasts that with how it's handled with Karia, which is just like there's the chief and then everybody else, and then you just obey the chief. So there are these nice cultural parallels and comparisons that are being made. So we will head into Lebuke in the next segment of Let's Remember Suikoden 3. I am very glad that this is happening again. I hope you sit down and watch this, even if it's just 5 or 10 of you. I love you all very much. Bye.